So, the rise of the BRICs, the emerging powers, possible future superpowers: Brazil, Russia, India, and China. China in particular, also India to an extent. They've been growing very, very quickly, economically particularly, but also militarily, culturally, in a whole number of ways, particularly over the last 20 or 30 years. And the point is that are they, or at least one of them, going to overtake the USA in terms of superpower status at some point in the future? I'm going to got you to do this little task on your sheets, but essentially we're using various different maps. We're looking at GDP growth forecast, for instance. Okay, the countries in blue are the ones that where it's forecast that GDP will grow significantly in the future. Red, pink, and yellow less so. And you can already see a pattern emerging there. Africa in particular, Asia in particular, growing quite significantly. Europe, North America, and Japan less so. We've also got population as well. Population change in various parts of the world. Again, particularly Africa and South America, we are seeing significant population changes. More population means more people working, means more output, etc., etc. But of course, there's also the downsides of this as well in terms of pollution and global warming. China, way up there. Okay, 7,711 million tons of carbon dioxide. That's now. It's going to increase as China develops, as does the rest of Asia and Oceania there. As they develop, emissions are going to increase. Europe and the US are going down. So as the BRICs start to develop, it also has an environmental impact as well. Global views of the US versus China. Higher favourability for the US are countries in blue. Red are more favourability for China than the US. So you can start to see some sides forming. Are we going to move to a new bipolar world whereby it's China versus the US, as opposed to the Soviet Union versus the US as it was in the Cold War? Will this be a new Cold War? And this map shows investments, investment in country, the biggest foreign investor in each country. So in terms of China, you can see the Chinese flag is all over the place, particularly in Africa, Australia and Asia, India, Pakistan, Russia, and the US for that matter. South America is almost exclusively the US in terms of the biggest foreign investor. And interestingly there, in Europe, Germany is the biggest investor in pretty much every European country. So the USA currently exerts its superpower status through various ways that we've already discussed: politics, culture, intergovernmental organisations like the IMF and the WTO. There's NATO as well, there's the World Bank, and also it's just a huge country. But there's an increasing element of Chinese investment in Hollywood. Chinese investment for various films is increasing year on year. So we're seeing a situation here whereby China is starting to get its foot in the door of what used to be an exclusively American cultural thing in terms of film and media. And the Chinese are now getting involved in it. There's an interesting link there to the film Warcraft, based on some computer game probably. So have a look at that and just see the key points there. Just to answer that question, how does the video show us that China contends for power culturally in terms of Hollywood? Now, prisoners of geography. You should have all read this before year 12. I'm sure you did. You've got some excerpts there of some bits of that book that relates to China. What I would like you to do is to have a good read through them, and then just these questions here. What's the key message? What are the finer details? What are some areas that you think are ripe for criticism? It says they prepare a 1-minute speech to argue China will be the next superpower. That could be interesting. We could even make that into a podcast. Also think about the USA as well. How would the USA disagree with the possible fact that China will be the next superpower? We can tabulate all that. You can see this, probably see that this is leading up to a good exam question. Evidence to support China will be the next superpower, and some counter arguments. So you can get all that from the reading. The New Silk Road, for instance, and African investment are two really, really big ones. And the Nicaragua Canal is a big one. China is investing an awful lot of money in building a rival to the Panama Canal so they can have control of some global trade. The New Silk Road is a trade route that goes through the landmass of Asia out to the sea using a port in Pakistan. And of course, African investment, we've talked about that quite a bit before. So pull some of this information together because it's very, very interesting and very, very useful. Also, a quick look at the Mint nations. Who are the Mint nations? So we've had the rise of the BRIC nations, but there are other countries that are starting to move up through the ranks as well. So a very brief SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats of the BRIC nations in terms of their development, but also try and think about the Mint nations as well. At least be able to identify who they are and be able to briefly talk about the fact that it's not just the BRICs, there are other countries coming up beneath them as well. So that leads us in a minute to a nice little exam question that I'm going to ask you to do. So SWOTs of China, SWOTs of Russia there, SWOTs of India and SWOTs of Brazil, which leads us beautifully into this, a 20-mark question. In the exam, for superpowers, there will be one question. It will be a 20-mark question. It will be an evaluate or an assess. So we just need to think of the 4-part structure. Introduction, arguments for, arguments against, and conclusion. So the work that you've brought together from this lesson should be able to give you 2 sides of an argument. To what extent are the rise of the BRICs a threat in terms of the world, but also an opportunity for the rest of the developing world? Okay, so if we can get that done and we can feed back about it, then we can start to think in a bit more detail about exam technique as well for Unit 3.